How you doing, Gabe?
Doing well, Greg. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Oh, pretty good, pretty good.
Awesome.
So we've just spent the last two of our conversations talking about a lot of if we go back to Weichbrot's redeeming vision and her argument of like multiple facets, one of them being to increase the quality of our archive, understanding art history on one hand, but we took this dive through Neumann and then the Pajot brothers into the world of symbolic thinking, thinking about how images can hold meaning. And that serves both the artist and the audience member. So the better you are as an audience member, the more art history you know, the better you'll be able to respond to art. But it's the same is true with artists, which
Yeah.
hopefully by the end of our dialogues we'll understand better why.
Yeah.
But now we're shifting. I had you read Walker Percy's the book is titled "The Message in the Bottle," but it's a series of essays, and we read the essay, "The Message in the Bottle."
Yeah.
Simple. And I see this as we're shifting subtly away from things that are purely things that are helpful to both artists and audience, and I think things that are more pointed towards artists. I think today's conversation will probably be maybe not as helpful to a person who is just interested in viewing art.
Okay.
I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
Maybe
Yeah.
not. But I think it is most pointedly going to be about how do we consider what we're doing when we're making art.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm wondering if you could just summarize what. It's a weird essay.
It is. It's a really weird essay where. So to start off, I actually thought it was a short story. Like that's like the way that it kind of starts and is framed is through a very kind of narrative idea.
Yeah. What is that? Like, how would you describe the narrative he sets up?
Yeah, somebody gets stranded on an island and they have no memory and they become a member of this society, and then messages messages in bottles start appearing on the beach, and there are thousands and thousands of messages, and this person is like going through the beach, picking up bottles, opening them, pulling out the messages, and trying to decide what to do with these really weird messages. And they're everything from things that are very like pertinent, like a neighboring island is going to invade in 3 days, to things that are like
Water boils at 212 degrees at sea level.
yeah, the melting point of lead is 350 degrees Celsius. Yeah, very strange things that like are seemingly useless, and then some things that are like completely kind of like poetic and esoteric, like things that are just like just kind of random sentences that are thrown in there.
Yeah. And like what? So that's like the extended metaphor he uses throughout the essay in order to communicate what? Like what is his point of that metaphor?
Yeah. So what he's trying to get at is if you're given, and he kind of frames it as almost an infinite number of messages in bottles. How do you decide what bottles are important or what messages you should pay attention to? And he goes through a couple different sorts of people and what sorts of bottles and messages they might be interested in, and he goes through kind of his reasoning for what messages we should be paying attention to and kind of why each sort of message is important to understand.
Yeah, he kind of sets up a main dichotomy. Do you remember what the two things are?
Well, he has a lot of dichotomies actually, but
he loves charts and graphs throughout this whole book.
Yeah, a lot of.
We'll
dichotomies.
read more of him next week too.
But I think the one you're probably referring to is whether or not it's is it the one between like essentially science and
It's he starts broader, but that's like the one we will talk about.
Okay.
Empirical versus analytical knowledge.
Yeah.
But he sets up first a thing of like a knowledge data point and news.
Oh yeah, okay.
And that's his big thing.
Yep.
Is how do you like as a receiver of messages, what's the difference between here's a fact and then here's news?
Yeah.
What did you get from that? What, like that's such a weird word in today's day and age where it's like we think of the news, the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Like what, but how is he using the word news?
Yeah, his definition of news is somewhat kind of I think I might say, is this going to affect me? And but in a very broad sense, where he kind of lays out this again, all of these different dichotomies, but lead melts at 350 degrees could be news to somebody, but it's not going to be news to everybody. whereas my island is going to be invaded in the next 3 days is news.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine a situation that just I had two films rush to my mind.
Yeah.
One is The Patriot, where
Yeah.
in The Patriot they're down on their luck and they're making their own shot for their muskets.
Yeah.
And it's like knowing what metals you can melt over a campfire.
Yep.
That is important news.
Yeah.
When you're the Revolutionary Army fighting the British in the 1700s.
Yeah.
God, what if I had gotten the century wrong there? In the 1700s. But it also made me think about, like, we often talk about people who have a lot of facts in their head. They're like good at trivia.
Yeah.
Even that word trivia, it comes from trivial.
Yeah.
Like these, yeah, you're right. That's a knowledge point.
Yeah.
Maybe one day it'll serve you at a trivia night in some bar where you're not drinking.
No, yeah, but as a member of a quiz bowl team in high school, I know a lot of trivia. It's a lot of information that is like, it occasionally comes in handy. There have been situations where it's like, oh my gosh, it's so weird that quiz bowl question is going to be pertinent right now.
Yeah.
But probably 99% of the time I'm like, there's no reason for me to know this.
I was going to say the thing that I like that Percy kind of emphasizes with this distinction is that there isn't some way of knowing a particular piece of information is newsworthy or not.
Yeah.
But rather, it has to do with the person receiving it.
Yep.
So for one person, understanding that lead would be a good thing to make bullets out of, that's good news to them.
Yeah.
For the Revolutionary War fighter,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that's a good someone, I hear that and it stands out in my mind.
Yeah.
And the psychologist would call this relevance realization.
Yeah.
How do we understand? Because like Percy's using this metaphor because he's saying that's us. We're born, like we come from somewhere, we don't know where.
Yep.
We don't know anything about whatever we were before we were born. And we're like here on this strange island we call Earth. And then we become a part of the culture. We join society, whether that means, a huge global society or a local one or just a family. Like you're somehow incorporated in a society. And one day you start wondering, what are all the other things that the rest of the world has to say? And that's all the messages coming. And you're receiving messages constantly. And the question for you is, well, which ones are important?
Yeah. Which questions are real news, and how do I distinguish, and how do I get better at understanding news, sharing news, like realizing news when it hits me, understanding what things are facts but still worth knowing. All those are questions that he raises in this book. Right.
You're starting to get like why I had you read this as an artist, because that's what the artist is wondering.
Yeah.
We want people to respond to our artwork as if it's important. We're hoping that we're saying something important. I actually don't like saying, like that's a common way to think of it. We think of art as expression. It's far more than that. But we're hoping that our artwork in some manner is received by an audience member and it is deemed relevant to the extent that it changes the course of their life. And so in the example he uses among the list of crazy things he lists is the neighboring island will attack in 3 days. That piece of information is going to grab that guy on that beach and be like, wait, this sounds like news. I should go talk to people about this. And it's like, that's what we want with our artworks. Someone to be like, oh, look at this. This matters.
Yeah.
I think that's like the difference for Percy between news and facts is like news affects you. Facts maybe intrigue you. It's nice to know some facts.
It is, like they're helpful, and knowing facts can help you understand news. Mm-hmm. And there are times where a fact that you've known for a while can even become news. Like let's go back to that strange lead example. I've never had to work with like melting lead, but at some point in the future, if I ever have to melt down lead, all of a sudden that thought is going to come up in my head. I'm going to be like, well, that's news now. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, knowing the melting point of lead is very relevant.
Right. And if I love this in the context again of Wendell Berry, of that like artwork is like a reminder. and how it's like when you have an archive, as Weichbrot was saying, then it's like suddenly these things can bubble up that it's like you remember, or even you remember what someone else remembers. You heard that person talking about it, and suddenly it's like now that thing becomes relevant and it comes to mind. So it's oftentimes with like art is a really weird experience where it is, again, as Barry was saying, as we've been talking about, it's like this nexus of helping us place different data points on like a tree of relevance, a tree of knowledge and meaning that can be helpful or important.
There's this book that we just, as a class, we've all been talking about a lot. So in my senior class right now, we're working on a map making project, which is so interconnected to all this stuff. Well, it's been really, really fascinating to work on that with everybody. But there's this book, and I'm actually blanking on the title, but you might know it when I start to describe it. The premise is that Marco Polo is describing his adventures to somebody.
Yes, Invisible Cities.
Invisible Cities, yeah, that's it. And the thing that people have all been mentioning is like, I've read this book in the past, and rereading it now, different parts of it are sticking out to me in like really strange and unique ways. And I think that's a really good illustration of kind of this idea of like different parts of that book are clearly news at different times to different people. And that's been the experience that everybody has had while reading it.
Well, and it's one of the beautiful things about revisiting artwork, especially stories from your childhood as an adult. You start to see like, oh my God, I wasn't even picking up on that.
Yeah.
Like the Chronicles of Narnia is so much more impactful for me now than when I was younger. There was not much that was newsworthy. There was a lot of funny little details about fawns and satyrs and badgers, and it just didn't. Now I see a lot more of like, oh my God, this is newsworthy.
Yeah, my grandfather, he reads The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, starting like on the same day and ending on almost the same day every single year, and he's done that for years.
Wow.
That's like just something, it's one of his favorite books. He's got a whole list of books like that. He's always reading, but he's got like these like ones that he always returns to.
Yeah.
And one of them is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and he never gets tired of it. Like he's read it every year for, I think probably 35 years or something like that at this point.
Yeah. This is like, the other dichotomy you mentioned, the empirical versus the analytical manner.
Yeah.
Where, so in the story, the scientists on the island, they're separating out the facts into, these are the things we can test, and these are the things that are like analytical knowledge that is that we can use. So these we need to see if it's true, and Percy's frustrated with that. Why did you pick up on why he doesn't like that distinction?
Not entirely. I remember he talked a bit about having this sense that there were some things that are like true across all islands, where he's like, oh, everybody knows that this is true simply because it's true, and then there are other things that are a little bit more, I think empirical is the right word, like centered on numbers and data. But I don't remember his frustration at it entirely.
His frustration was that it wasn't broad enough, and because they were just looking at the message and not the effect of the message on the person. And this is where, Percy, in case you don't know a little bit about, do you know anything about his biography?
I know, actually, yeah.
Really fascinating individual, deeply Catholic. He was trained as I forget the name, but diagnosing diseases, specifically like rare diseases. But we're talking like post-war, so it's not like House MD. Because this is like medicine a while ago. In doing that, he came down with tuberculosis, and he has a really strange childhood. There's a really great book about 4 people: Walker Percy, Dorothy Day, Flannery O'Connor, and Thomas Merton, by Paul Elie, called "The Life You Save May Be Your Own," and it delves into all 4 of their biographies, and Percy's in particular. It's really wonderful. But he's kind of macabre. He's very interested in deadly diseases. While he's researching all of this in medical school, he gets tuberculosis and has to live in a sanatorium for a while. And so he is surrounded by sickness and the scientific mindset. and he starts to become a novelist, and he like gets rid of all of this like scientific worldview that he thinks is limiting his capacities, and he takes that in an analytical way towards creative endeavors. And so in this essay in particular, he's particularly interested in that Christian aspect of, the reason he's using the term news is because the word gospel means good news. So he's like, we keep telling people this gospel, and yet they're not receiving it as news. Why?
Yeah.
And that's why he's interested in what's the difference between knowledge and news. And that's why he sees like this scientific endeavor to kind of quantify things that you are like, you don't know if it's true until you test it, and then things that are logically consistent and you can analyze and see it to be true always. Like it's going to be 37 degrees tomorrow. It's like, well, that's not analytically true. There's going to be 37 degrees tomorrow probably somewhere. And so it's like, we can see that in Alaska tomorrow, it's going to be 30, well, even here it might be 37 tomorrow.
Here it might be.
Yeah, just a little north of us, it'll be 37 tomorrow.
Yeah.
Fahrenheit, of course, the Lord's measurement.
That's a bold statement right there.
So in that sense, like he's got a particular avenue, but I think this is particularly useful for artists because that's what we mostly care about. We're not trying to quantify or analyze the world usually. We're trying to impact an audience member with the products of our hands.
Yeah.
And that's I think that it's a uniquely forgotten aspect of a lot of visual art is that we should care about how our artwork is received.
Yeah, I think there's that message which gets thrown around sometimes, which is like, do you like it? That's what matters. Like, did you enjoy making it? Did you like stop caring so much about what other people think about it? Which is a helpful thing to hear sometimes, I think.
Yeah.
But it also does really miss the point of why are you making things at all? Are you only making things for yourself? Because if that's the case, like, well, then why are you showing them to people? Why if you're getting negative critique and your response is I don't care, then why did you show it to anybody in the first place?
Yeah. Well, and it also is interesting in the sense of if you're just looking to please the audience, then you're going to be making, I'll call it comforting work. I'm not opposed to comforting work. I like comforting work. Like Narnia is comforting to me. But there's other things that I've needed to hear. Like, for example, I don't like the Rothko Chapel. I don't want to spend much time there. The Rothko Chapel changed my life. That's the difference there is like, did I like it? No. Do I want to spend time in there? No. But what it did was important. And that's the thing is like, there's so much artwork that goes far beyond comfort. And so for an audience member, if they're just looking for, do I like this? It's like, you're asking to be flattered. I want the art to be what I like. It's like, okay, that's fine sometimes, especially for your house.
Yeah.
Please buy art that you like for your house.
Yeah.
But for your life, like there's some movies that I've watched that are really intense and I never want to see again, but I needed to see them.
Yeah, for sure. It's like this idea of, well, we've touched on it a few times, but the idea that art can have all of these different uses in all of these different places on this map of nexus points and map of meanings.
Yeah.
And there are points on that where being taken out of your comfort zone are just as important as being like recomforted afterward. And especially when it comes to, these ideas of like the house or architecture or like finding stability, art can be incredibly helpful. But at the same time, living your entire life in stability isn't a place where, anything actually happens. If you spend your entire life in a comforting space,
right,
you're not going to get much done. You're just going to want to sit there and be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, even just in the, going back to scientific thoughts, knowing how to start a fire without matches is probably not relevant to most people.
Yeah.
But you'll want that information when it is relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sort of thing of like, there's lots of artworks that held information that I didn't know I would need. And because I've experienced them, when something happens in life, it's been interesting to be like, oh, that's what that was getting at. You know, when I think this happens for me a lot with Shakespeare. It's like, oh, that's what Macbeth was really about. Now I understand.
Interesting.
Like, you know, like these kinds of experiences where it's like, thank God that was in my archive. I didn't know when I would need it. There's that aspect that I think is really important. But then there's so many times when it's like you didn't realize that, you know, like I think we told the story of my James Turrell experience. And it's like, I didn't know where to find the answer to understanding how infinity might even begin to be conceptualized. And then it just like smacked me in the face. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like there's these artwork can do things that are way beyond just empirical and analytical things because they rely on the viewer, which Percy sets up like 3 points that I want to go through, that they're kind of simplified in this manner. Like, something is news when it aligns with these 3 points for a viewer. Oh, yeah. And that is, it is relevant to the hearer's predicament. It is the trustworthiness, like the bearer of the news is deemed trustworthy. And someone understands that the outcome of the information is likely or possible. So I think about like a really impactful book for me was Steinbeck's East of Eden. There's this weird chapter in it where it talks about like two men dying and like what the ultimate outcome of their life is. And it's like relevant to my predicament. I'm going to die someday. An interesting, very thoughtful figure that I deem to some degree trustworthy. Yeah. And then when it came to likelihood or possibility, 100%. It's like what he, you know, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says in that book, but that book put its case forward in such a manner that like I sat up and listened. You know, it's like, oh, there's something here. Like this is important to me. And then, you know, on the other side, like, you know, my students mention things. They're like, oh, this song is so slay or whatever. And I listen to it and it's like, this is not relevant to my predicament. I do not think that this person is very good at their craft. And on top of that, the likelihood of me needing to, you know how to Dougie. That's really dating myself.
That's true.
A really old one, but that's the one that popped to mind.
That's fair.
Teach me how to Dougie. I'm like, no thanks. Yeah. Not relevant.
Yeah, or the example that he gives in this book in particular is of one of, I think he says it's like two men, and one of them is like kind of, they both have the same circumstances. They're both like living a fulfilling life in some way, or at least like they're physically and like they're like physically safe and they have security. One of them is willing to just like accept this, and the other one is like kind of uncomfortable with this idea that this is all there is. And somebody comes to them and says, I have news that's going to change your life, and it's going to make some huge difference. And the person who is like just kind of like okay with where they're at doesn't even hear the person. They're just like, oh well, that's fine. I don't really care. And the person who's unsatisfied, it's relevant to their predicament, which is that they're unsatisfied with their current circumstance, is like, oh my gosh, please tell me, like what are you talking about? Like, this is what I've been looking for. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah. And it makes me think about, okay, so I think Percy's right in that regard. Of like, I think about like the news is happening 24/7 on like 7 channels right now. Yeah. And most of us just ignore it. I think it's for these reasons. And then when something happens that wakes everyone up to realize, wait, there's something going on and it might affect me, everyone tunes in. Yeah. It's like, that's why everything's a big deal. Why suddenly it's like the thing we called winter, now it's a polar vortex. Because, like, I mean, I don't want to fall into vortexes. Yeah. Like, this might be relevant. And then we listen, and then they're like, brought to you by, and that's really what they're trying to do. That's why it's not the news. It's the news brought to you by. You always have to remember that with any of those channels. Because they're trying to get your attention, not so that you pay attention to the news, but so you pay attention to the sponsors or or that the sponsors make their way into your subconscious.
Of course, or the fact that that even winter storms have names now, right?
Yeah.
It used to be reserved for hurricanes, because a hurricane is news. A hurricane is like, if a meteorologist is like, hey, hurricane's about to happen, everybody's like, oh, okay, hurricane's about to happen, board up my windows, all that. And gradually more and more storms have been getting this hurricane treatment to make people tune in. If you hear winter storm Irene or whatever is going to show up, you're like, oh, does that mean that this storm is going to be as bad as a hurricane? Does that mean that this is going to like change my life like significantly in the next couple days? And the answer to that is no, actually.
But they got your attention.
But now you listen to the next ad segment or something.
You can see like kind of where we're headed. That's the thing of like, whether you're a newscaster, let's put it this way, whether you're a television channel that needs viewers, or you're an artist that needs viewers, there are strategies you can employ to try to get people's attention. Because what we're seeking is that audience who perceives what we're doing in that state where it seems relevant to their predicament, they trust us, and whatever we're talking about is like likely to happen. So they keep coming back and they keep listening. It's like, that's exactly what an artist wants from their viewer. They want them to care about what they're making. They want them to listen and be involved and think that you praise you for your skills, and ultimately to say this other people should listen as well. It's the same kind of predicament, even though artists would never say, I want my work to be news to you. But it's like we want people to pay attention to our work. And over the last, I'd say the general strategy, so we'll talk about the news strategy. The news strategy is that gets people's attention, let's try it here. And that creates an arms race of, well, they've got, I think about the development of Stephen Colbert critiquing Bill O'Reilly and the kind of like crossfire talking heads, and how it's like, that's every channel now. It's just people yelling at each other because it worked once. And it kind of worked for a little while. And now it's like fizzling out because they've become the boy who cries wolf. It's like, do I care that they name winter storms? Nope. They've dulled their tools, and they have to find a new strategy to continue to cut through my malaise of experience and get my attention and be like, this is important, listen to me, which is hard. That's why podcasters are succeeding in that realm in general, because they seem more trustworthy.
In another critique we had, I think you were talking about the purpose of shock value, where you said shock value works great the first time, and it works every time. It's like you have one guaranteed hit with shock value, and the issue with that is that the returns from shock value diminish so quickly. Where it's like, I think the internet is a great example of this, honestly, where it's like, if you think about the first time that you see something like crazy on the internet, it has a really big impact. Where it's like, I like remember the first time that like I saw like a car accident on the internet, where I was like, oh my gosh, like I just saw a car crash, that was crazy. Or and now that doesn't really affect me anymore. Like if I see like a car like run into a telephone pole on the internet, it's kind of like, well, just another video. Like I've seen this so many times at this point. Yeah. And the argument you made was for one of subtlety, actually, which is that while subtlety might not have this kind of guaranteed 100% hit rate, it's certainly a more sustainable way of communicating news.
Yeah, it's like the slow burn versus the flash in the pan. The flash in the pan gets more attention, but the audience you're looking for, are they more, are they looking for firecrackers, or are they looking for a candle, or are they looking for an incandescent light? It's like there's a lot that you need to discern there. Sometimes you do want the flash in the pan. Yeah. You just have to realize that no one's going to light their house with a flash in the pan. Like like a strobe light? Like no one puts those in their houses. Yeah. Like if there's anyone who puts a strobe light in their house, comment below. I would like to see that.
So it's probably a bad house.
Yeah, exactly. But see, that's where I'm curious enough where I'm like, maybe there's something there. Yeah. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe there's news hidden in the strobe light house that I don't know about. Yeah. And maybe it'll help me in my life. Probably not, though. Probably it'll be dumb. So I was thinking about this kind of the twist here, which Barry, again, in his essay, hints at where he says, the reason he's talking about what the heck is a poem is because he ultimately is asking the question, how do I be a responsible poet? If I want to be a poet, at some point I have to think, well, what is a poem? And then I have to think, my job as a poet to make poems, what does it mean to do that responsibly, to do it well? To what do I owe duty or, sacrifice? And we're kind of turning in that manner of like, okay, we want viewers to respond as if what we're saying matters. We want to get their attention. Then we have to ask ourselves, well, how do we do that in a responsible manner? And so, like, I think, you've got this image up here. You'll flash it for the viewers. Ad Reinhardt. I put this up. What is the date on that one? 64, right?
Yeah, 64.
1964. I would say since really the 1880s, but perhaps a little bit earlier. People there's argument about when modernism starts, but the Clement Greenberg argument for modernism is this pursuit of the avant-garde. And that really is what you just described. It's a strategy of how do I get people's attention? Shock them. And that's what Greenberg calls it, the avant-garde, the tip of the spear. You are doing the next new thing. And so there's always this strategy of chasing after newness because we like looking at the new thing. That's why there's always a new iPhone, and why we know that they develop technologies that could go into all the phones, but they literally are like, well, we just found one new thing. Let's do it in number 13. Let's save this one for 14 because we don't know if we're going to find something new by the time we release 14. So we've got it in the hopper because we keep needing newness. Otherwise, we will lose their attention.
Yeah.
And it's like, that you can see the problem. Well, can you see the problem of that strategy?
Well, I mean, it's this idea of, well, for one, intentionally kind of holding back, which is maybe not the most honest thing in the entire world, but it's that at some point, if you're always relying on the new, like, what do you do when you run out of the new? Like, what do you start to say when you haven't found some? What do you do when that's not there? Can you talk without trying to use that flash in the pan dynamic?
Yeah. Contemporary art.
That's the question.
Well, I mean, that is the thing of like something happened between like the 60s and I'd say the 90s where there was a realization of like we kind of are out of material and we call it formal, like so Ad Reinhardt, for the audience, we're looking at, it's like a black canvas with subtle variations to where we're seeing a grid of 9 squares. They're not quite a very perfect grid, like there's a fuzziness between them.
Yeah.
But it's basically just black. And you could see, like, you imagine this, like if this was teleported as a painting made in 1776, it would be like, what the heck is that? Especially if someone said, hey, look at my painting. No one would understand it. 1960s, it was pretty like avant-garde, and Reinhardt was really trying to go down the path of Greenberg, arguing for the avant-garde, saying that the best artists are the ones who are pursuing the next new thing. They're on the cutting edge of our culture making, and they have this understanding of what is coming next. And so we look to them to find out what the future will hold. And somewhere around Reinhardt, that comes to the grinding halt, because it's like, once you do this, where do you go?
Yeah.
And then we avant-garde starts to like, well, most people would say it starts to like look down and notice we have belly buttons.
Yeah. Or like you've mentioned a couple times, like that piece in that one cafeteria that's like the picture of the wall, right? Where it's like, like we're literally starting to ask the question of like, what if I just didn't show anybody anything at all? Is that new? That
right.
seems pretty new to me, because
right.
everything else has been something, so maybe I'll just do nothing and see what happens there.
Well, and you can see you get all kinds of other things. Okay, can we think about new content? Can we think about voices from other societies that have not been heard yet in the West? And then you can see all the funny problems of that, of like, well, just because the West hasn't discovered, say, the Ghanaian artists, why does the West suddenly validate the Ghanaian artists by noticing that. There's all kinds of issues of like, you're searching for the new in every single aspect of an artwork or the world of art. And eventually like that udder will go dry at some point as well.
Yeah. And it's also this idea of like trading in the exotic, right? Where it's like treating something from Ghana as new is completely inaccurate, because in reality that's their canon, that's their tradition. They've been doing it that way for thousands of years and they're masters at it, and it's not like just because we've noticed it for the first time doesn't give it its value. What gives it its value is that they've been doing it for so long and that they're so amazing at it.
Exactly.
Which
there's all kinds of issues that bubble up around this, and you can see like, okay, this is how that second thing of the trustworthiness of the bearer eroded over the 20th century. Artists in general are like, it came to a forefront in the 80s and 90s during the culture wars over the national endowments for the arts. But basically, all these artists are doing these weird events, and they're real mad at the Christian fundamentalists are real mad at Serranos for Piss Christ.
Yep.
And they don't trust, like, even if Serranos was saying, look, I'm a Catholic, I'm not doing this to desecrate it, I'm doing this because I'm searching for that new thing. What is a new way to look at Christ?
Yeah.
They don't trust him anyways. He's like, all of those artists lost the trust of the general audience. Obviously they kept some audience, but they lost the trust of that audience, and through that, they were not even received as just fact. They were received as like blasphemous.
Yeah.
It was the person who said, this is blasphemous art, was now the news bearer, and it ennobled the mob, or enlivened the mob, to turn on those artists and literally defund the National Endowments for the Arts, so that they only fund individual institutions instead of individual artists. So I guess you can look at an institution's history and it's more trustworthy than a lone artist, which is probably true.
Probably true, but still, it is a hard. I was having a conversation with some of my friends who aren't in the art department the other day, and one of the things that was like a common sentiment was like, I just don't like art where I can't like see something that I recognize right away. I don't understand it. I don't trust it really. Like that was the basis of the argument, was like, I don't get it. I don't like it. Yeah. And we talked about that idea of like, oh, it's not art to you, and that was a lot of the conversation. Was like, that's fair. Like that's okay to have that kind of idea.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is like, really, when you do that, you cut yourself off from, at this point, almost 150 years of like really strange and new ideas that have been brought to the table.
Yeah. Well, and this gets at what I want to ask next, which is, so we're a bunch of message makers. Every single work of art you make is a little message in a bottle, thrown out into the ocean of, not for you, thank God, but Instagram is where most of us are pitching our bottles, hoping someone notices. And galleries and museums, they all function as different beachheads where people can come and receive these messages. And we want someone to pick it up and be like, this is the thing. And on the one hand, you could chase newness, but I think it is that shock value of like, it works a couple times and then people get tired of it. And I have friends who make art, they're making like the same paintings over and over and over and over. And I can't imagine I can imagine this. It's one of the reasons I moved away from graphic design is, by and large, most companies, when they're looking for logos, they're looking for something that is tried and tested. And so you end up with relative cliches that you're trying to move forward. It's like, that right there explains why, almost every logo is in a circle. It's like, that's what everyone does.
Yeah.
It works.
It works great.
Even if it works poorly, which it probably works great, but even if it did, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is that it's working. And so they've got their money on the line and they're taking a risk. It's hard to get them to do the crazy thing that'll somehow, push the limits of what a logo could be. So inevitably, as a graphic designer, you end up making a lot of the same thing over and over. And I can't handle that. It's like I need something new. I need to be trying something else. I need to be turning, or, I might do a lot of the same things, but I at least need the ability to work on multiple projects at once, so that when I start to get bored and tired of this, or be usually angry with it, I need to go over here and try this thing, and then there, and then over there. And that's where I think it's surprising to me. An artist might hit on an idea that's maybe a little bit new, and then they make like 100 of those paintings. And then they're just the whole time hoping, what is the next? Will I have another one in me? Will I have another new idea somewhere? That's why Apple is holding back some things for 14 and 15. What number are they on now? I don't know.
I
think they're on 15.
I think it's 15, yeah.
But that's why they're holding back, is because they're in the same predicament. What if after we develop, the AirPods, what if we're done? What if there's nothing else? It's like, well, we'll have this one little one.
Yep.
And so we'll get people's money then for at least a 16 if we've got that feature.
Yeah.
All the while, they're constantly researching all of the possibilities of new features.
Yeah.
It's like that's what the artists are doing, and that is a way to exist. But I think that has lost a huge audience. And I don't know about you, but my passion is like, I think it's sad that more people are seemingly locked out of the institutions of higher art. I think that they should be broader. I think that they're relevant. I think that they're relevant to more people's predicaments. I think it's likely that what they say is going to happen. It's already happened. And the thing is that the artists generally lost the trustworthiness.
Yeah. And
so it's like, so what can we do? Well, maybe that's the question for the end of our conversation. But let's go back to, I'm rambling today.
No, it's all right.
I'm wondering, what are some ideas? Well, I've got 3 ideas, and I would love to hear your thoughts on them, and to see if you have other, like I just kind of spitballed 3 other strategies besides newness that one could do. And that's why I loaded up some art, and I would love to hear. So my first strategy is contrast. So go to the Rococo.
Yeah, for sure. So this will get put up on the screen.
Yeah. So I want to do like a historical example, and then like a more contemporary example of using contrast. 1735, 1740, is when these are being made. Famously, Marie Antoinette and her husband are in the French Rococo era. And when I say contrast, the reason someone during that time frame in France, that a room like this would get their attention, is because it's very different than everything else. Obviously, everything. I mean, how would you describe this to someone?
Yeah, so I think the first word that comes to mind is kind of like opulent, gilded. Like, you see this and you're like, oh, like this is extravagant. Like, this is taking every piece of what a room is and like cranking it up to 11, where it's like, how much detail, how much wealth can I put on display here?
Yeah.
Every surface is painted. Everything's in a regular shape. Everything has like almost too much detail in it. Like it's like almost hard to focus on any singular part of the room.
Yeah. So this is again, this proves both my points. One, that avant-garde is a difficult cross to bear.
Yeah.
And 2, that contrast works. This was so contrasting to the French world that they revolted. They literally, like, people looked in those windows from the outside and thought, that looks nothing like my experience. It was news to them that that's how rich you could be. And they're, and like, then you famously have I don't know if it's actually true that Marie Antoinette said this, but the let them eat cake thing of like, she lives such a different life that there is this, like, she doesn't understand that cake is not prevalent outside of spaces that look like this. And so you can see, like, again, the artists who are doing this is like groundbreaking. Like, the Rococo is a new style. It's its own endeavor, and it is opulence to the extreme. The artists who are able to do this are pushing the envelope of decorative arts, filigree, you know, just all kinds of, you know, they're taking the Baroque, which this comes out of, and like turning up the lavishness to an nth degree.
Yeah.
And as they do that, their viewers become acclimated to it to the extent that Marie Antoinette famously or mythologically doesn't even understand that cake is not that is exceptional to most people. So like it's bizarre that it actually functions in both. I wasn't thinking about that beforehand, but
The fact that it's new and contrasting, or
yeah, that it points out the problems of newness, but the effectiveness of contrast.
yeah,
Like it was so effective that everyone noticed. You know, if they had been humbler, like you know, would they have? They could have been just as, you know, in private, just as over the top. But if they hadn't have had such opulence in the public getting their attention, would they have escaped the guillotine? I don't know.
it's a fair question, especially when you look at the luxurious lifestyles of some of the ultra wealthy today, where the things that get people's attention are those things that are new or contrasting, where it's like what makes the news about Jeff Bezos is that Jeff Bezos can go to space when he wants to.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
to me, that's so far out of reach. It's like, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this guy can go to space if he wants to? Like, that's how much
Right.
money he has?
Right.
Whereas all of the other things that are probably like equally as life-changing we don't hear about are the things that we don't maybe care about, things that aren't that new or aren't that contrasting. Like the fact that he hasn't had to cook, clean, or think about any detail of his life he doesn't want to for the last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, that's extraordinary too.
Yeah.
But going to space, that's new.
Right, right. And those are the things that get our attention.
Yeah.
And what's funny is you think about all of the politicians are a great realm to think about this in, of how many lengths they go to try and become united with the voting bloc. They're trying to not contrast it. So like the famous examples of Hillary Clinton changing her accent per location she's in, she's trying not to contrast because contrast is exactly that. Contrast stands out and it gets people's attention. In the sense of messages in the bottle, like there's all kinds of ways to contrast, but this aligns with some of the feedback we just critiqued all the seniors. One of the most common feedback, go bigger.
Yeah.
It's like, just imagine that. You're walking on the beach, there's a bunch of little vials and then suddenly like a wine carboy, 10 times the size.
Yeah.
Everyone walking that beach, they're going to be seeing all, and then, whoa, contrast.
Uh-huh.
And they're going to walk over to it, and they're at least going to give it the time of day. Hopefully, there's a really big, good message in that carboy, digging it out, and way longer than lead melts at, 350 degrees?
Yeah, 350. Yeah. Which, I think contrast is interesting. I think it points really strongly to the new still. I think that the question for contrast would be, does contrast keep on working even after the newness of it has went away?
Yeah, so I would point to the, especially in internet culture and like your generation, the fact that fads are cyclical so often, like they're cyclical but like slightly shifting forward. So there is some newness in contrast, but there's also a return to the old in contrast. And we can see this back and forth. Traditionally what that meant in a very trackable realm was feminine beauty standards. In times of sparsity, when most people were starving, the sort of more full curvy figure that was, you can see this in Greek art frequently, is deemed beautiful. And then in times of plenty, the skinny. And you can see why. Again, it's getting at contrast of like, when everyone's fat, the thin person's noticed. When everyone's thin, the bigger person's noticed. And so there's this back and forth of like, that keeps on going through in cycles. And so broadly speaking, it's the same thing of like, you can see this in internet culture where there will be fads that go through of like a return to sort of like handmade stuff. And then suddenly a new technology, like right now AI generators are being developed, and then it's like, oh, but there's something there. And I swear, like in the next few months, there will be a large contingent of moving away from, as we still haven't fully embraced AI generative art yet. So it'll probably get to a place where it starts to become embraced, and then suddenly the cool thing will be to reject it again. And it's just like that will keep happening. And it's all a matter of contrast, because when everyone's using AI, the person who's not will stand out. But when no one's using AI, the person who uses AI will stand out.
No, I mean, I think if it's not already out there, I think we're probably months away from human written content being sold at a premium, which is going to push this market of everybody being worried about their jobs back in the other direction in an interesting way, where all of a sudden we're going to start seeing human created content as like almost artisanal, like human written ad copy is going to have the same status as like a pair of boots made by a real leather worker, as opposed to the ones just kind of cranked out.
Yeah. Well, so the more current reference I wanted to point out as a contrasting, as taking on how do you get closer at least to the state of being newsworthy, is through contrast. And I have a good story about this. The movie I want to bring up is Fight Club.
Yeah.
And so in the 90s, when was it made? 1999?
99.
Yeah. Wow, what a good year. I remember watching this movie and thinking about this I probably watched it in the year 2000, but it's called Fight Club, and it's got a really weird cover. He's holding a bar of soap, but it's Brad Pitt. I know Brad Pitt from other movies. I know fight movies. I know kung fu films. I know Rocky. I know all of these movies about fighting. And I'm young at the time. I'm a young man in my teens-ish. And I'm going in to watch this film thinking I'm about to watch a fight movie. And then it is not that. Like, sure, it is about a fight club. And there are some fight scenes. But it is not like watching, I'm thinking of like Ip Man or some of those really intense kung fu
those
and Muay
famous
Thai.
like Jackie Chan, the entire thing is one beautiful fight sequence, and that's all you're there to watch.
It's not that at all.
No.
And it got my attention.
Yeah.
Because really it's a movie about in a world where everything is so easy, where men, we look at the westerns of old and we think about the man staking their claim and finding their mind and taming the wild nature. In a movie in a world where everything is tame, what is the young man to do? What is the young man to do with their aggression? It's a fight movie about what are you supposed to do when there's no more fights to fight. And I remember watching this with my dad because it's very contrasting. It does this through some really dark, gritty, disgusting kind of shots.
Yeah.
It's not a pretty film. And I was watching it with my dad, and he got disgusted and left. And so we can see here, it wasn't relevant to him. Uh-huh. He's already fought his fight. He's raising his family. Fought his fight. He's raising his family. The likelihood of needing to know what to do with his aggression, very low potential for that. I was a young boy.
Yeah.
It was like, I was like, I have never thought about my desire for aggression in this way before.
It's a really interesting case because it makes you, I think it's actually an incredibly successful movie because it gives you such an easy to look at answer and then shows you all the problems with that answer and then gives you several other answers to consider within the movie about like, these are all these different characters who are trying to handle their aggression, and these are all the characters who are affected around them by their aggression.
Right.
Like, what do all these different strategies look like?
Yeah, it doesn't offer an answer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, especially as a kid, that gave me a trustworthiness because I was so tired of hearing adults tell me the answers.
Yeah.
And here was this guy. There's a really good interview of the author. I forget his name.
Chuck Palahniuk or something like that?
No, it's like Pozniak or something. It's like a really strange name. But there's an interview of him on Joe Rogan, and it's really intriguing. But that tone of, I see your problem, and I'm not going to offer you a solution, but I'm going to show you what all of these characters do.
Yeah.
And all of them, none of them are ideal. That garnered trust with me as a young boy who was just like, surrounded by people preaching messages to me. This is the way. This is the way. And then here's a guy like, I don't know what the way is, but you're in trouble.
Yeah, it's really I just touched my microphone. I hope that doesn't mess up the audio. It's interesting because like through all these different characters, even the characters that are like, I would say, morally like bankrupt in some way, are still portrayed as like cool or desirable. Like the character of Tyler, who is like, nobody would want to be around this guy. He's awful. But then you watch the movie and you're like, yeah, but he's cool though. He's really cool.
Yeah.
Like that's everything about him is cool.
Right. And even like the Ed Norton, Brad Pitt like dilemma or dichotomy is about contrast. Someone who blends in with the rest of the world, Ed Norton, Brad Pitt, who in every way stands out. He constantly, his character is constantly breaking the rules and pointing out how he's breaking the rules and doing all these strange things. The whole entire film is an exercise in contrast. And it's through contrast that the message starts to become accessible, or at least you could call it, we pay attention to the message. Because that's one thing Percy doesn't quite talk about is like, he assumes that someone's going to pick up the bottles and read the messages.
Yeah.
And it's more like the internet has made it so it's not like there's hundreds of messages on the beach. It's like there's hundreds of thousands of messages on the beach. And you're walking on them like they're pebbles now. And so how do you make, it's just like, that's the thing. You can pick these up and look at them and you can get some lols out of them.
Yeah.
It's like, what is the artwork that everyone's looking at? Memes. Things that are like short, quick, little funny, shiny little baubles.
Like if you think about it, if we're using this example of messages in bottles, it's like YouTube Shorts or TikTok or Instagram's, is it Reels?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like what that is that's like just like throwing bottles at you. You just gotta catch them. Like it's like, here's a bottle, you could catch it, read it. Oh, the next bottle's down the line. Like you there's no time to decide.
Right.
Or you can scroll as much as you want. Or
I like this metaphor. It's like they're breaking bottles in front of you with a little poof of message. Ooh. But then it fades, and you they're being thrown at such a rate that you forget which ones you watched.
Yeah, and that there's like it's happening right here, but then there's also like 100 other lines of that exact same happening. And if you get bored with this line of bottles, you can just turn your head. Oh, look at those ones.
Right.
Click here.
And it's the same thing with like you can see this with Marvel films. Like all of these Marvel films, and then Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse stands out. Contrast.
Yeah.
Like all of these gritty TV shows that are like responding to Fight Club, and I actually don't know if there's a good contrasting TV show yet. We're still in that like gritty realism TV show. Something will probably break out soon. I don't know if they can afford it.
Yeah. Or are you talking about like
Breaking Bad is influenced. Breaking Bad contrasted. They took the Fight Club mentality into the television sphere, completely redefined the genre.
Yeah.
And like, we're still getting copycats. Even like Game of Thrones was a good example of copying Breaking Bad in tone and style in all those ways.
I've got one. There's a show. I actually haven't seen it, but everybody on the Hope College like residential life staff loves this show called Ted Lasso.
That literally came to mind. I was like, oh wait, Ted Lasso.
It's like people are like, it's wholesome, it's funny, it's great. I love every character in it. Like it's redemptive, and people love this show. I've never seen it, but I've heard it's really good.
Yeah, I watched the first 2 seasons. It's really fun.
Yeah,
I haven't seen. I think there's a 3rd season, but yeah, it's a great example of like. Back when The Office was on, you would never sell a TV show of an aw shucks football coach from the South going to London to try to teach them how to play soccer. And it's all about like loving each other. Like that's the story of the show.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you needed the Breaking Bads, the Game of Thrones, all of these like dark, gritty shows where everyone ultimately just becomes worse.
Yeah.
Suddenly, by contrast, that show stands out.
It's like it's like, I would say probably it's the best response to like The Walking Dead, where it's like everybody I know hits some sort of a point during that show's runtime where they're like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I don't like these people.
Right.
I don't like this story. Like this is, it's just hard to watch no matter how interesting it is.
Yeah. I mentioned that in my video on The Last of Us, where after Rick loses Carl, spoiler alert for like what season 47 or something, Carl finally dies. Then it's like, well, the interesting thing was seeing what he had to sacrifice to be a father.
Yeah.
Like that's what's interesting about the whole show. And when it's gone, it's like, okay, so he's just like a horrible person, like the rest of them.
Yep. Yeah.
But he's the horrible person I recognize because he was in the last season.
Yep. Yeah.
It's very bizarre. So another strategy I was thinking of is what I would call mystery. I think I had you, what did I have you load here? Oh, Sistine Chapel. Go to the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah.
So another way, this one I think is less attention getting and more attention holding. So a way to like hold, once somehow you've gotten the viewer's attention, one of the ways you can hold their attention is through like a mysterious thing where it's like, I don't understand this, but I'm intrigued. It's like hitting these things of like something here is relevant. I actually think that's why mystery stories were so popular in the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So you have like G.K. Chesterton,
Agatha Christie, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle,
and why do I want to say it's not O'Connor? It's the anyways. There was another really famous British female friend, a friend of the Inklings, who it'll come to me in a few minutes. But anyways, you get this like mystery because you have all this scientism, like the development of modern science, and then suddenly it's like people want something where they're not certain. They've been told all of these facts. They're still intrigued. The Sherlock Holmes is so perfectly a scientist, but then the story event for us is living in mystery. So it makes sense that it starts to develop at that time because that is contrasting at the time. But I think there's even something more powerful about mystery where it's like the Sistine Chapel is this kind of, there's so much going on that, and it's taking non-traditional roots at things, even famously, the God creating Adam. There's such an aura of mysteriousness. Why is God in this strange shape with all these other figures? Why is Adam so like lethargic and like responding in such a not
reverent way?
Yeah, but still, it's still beautiful, and it's in all of these other things. And then the Sistine Chapel as a whole, it's the context of that, because Michelangelo also paints the front of it, which is the Last Judgment. So you've got ceiling of the creation of humanity, wall of its ultimate end, and you're there in that space, and it's overwhelming, and like maybe mystery is the wrong word, but it's something like awe-inspiring, where you get there and it's such an overload of your senses and things to look at and try to piece together and understand, that it puts you in like a place of quandary, mystery or something like that.
It sounds like what you're talking about is like a sense of depth, where it's like, even if this kind of shock value is what gets you there originally, there's this sense that you can kind of keep on going down level after level, and that there's going to be more information and more revealed there.
Yeah. It's like Lost, the TV show, or like even like Game of Thrones. There was this constant like, yeah, that's actually really good to think about, is what's his name, who did Lost? J.J. Abrams. His whole entire story idea is on this, where he's talked about this with the Mission Impossible that he directed, where it was like, make a mystery box.
Yeah.
Don't tell the audience what is in it. They will watch just because they want to see what's in it. It's like that weird mixed mystery box holds our attention because we keep thinking the answer's in there.
Yeah.
It's like you go into the Sistine Chapel and it's like every little thing is like some weird hint at the theology of that space, but then it's somehow held at arm's length. It's somehow ambiguous and not super, it's not a diagram, it's not a, I think of the opposite of mystery in the realm of Christian theology is like the Jesus prayer tract tells you exactly how you're supposed to be a Christian.
Yep.
In like 7 points or something.
Yep. Yeah.
And it's like all laid out, and it's like, I've done it.
Here's the prayer you need to pray.
Yeah.
Say it, you're done, good to go.
Right. And it's like you walk into this space and you're saying I was made by God, and you're saying I'm going to either be saved or damned. And like, how am I supposed to handle that? And it's like, we're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
Like, figure it out. Here's all the
Exactly.
stuff. It's very, interactive. The other thing I think of is Anne Hamilton's Event of a Thread, which is a little bit newer than that. She just draws in crowds, and it's very strange to wonder why. So this piece, I can't even remember all the elements, but at its core, giant curtain attached to swings. People are on those swings on different sides of the curtain. People reading a scroll into microphones that are then communicated to radios that are in bags, and they're reading the scroll to pigeons in cages. Someone else across the way, sitting at a table, watching the curtain move in a mirror above their head, and then writing what then becomes the scroll for the next day.
Yeah.
And then a song is played at the end of the day for the pigeons to go roost in the rafters, and that song is recorded, and then that song starts the next day on its own record. And there's all kinds of other elements.
Yeah.
And this drew people in mass to this space. Just something about, there was some sense of like, I don't know, connection to something. I mean, she called it the event of a thread. So Anne Hamilton was thinking about the way in which threads bind us, how so much of our lives happen inside of like the threads of our clothing. And then to see this massive curtain and to see us tugging on it on swings, and like there was something beautiful about it, and there's something mysterious, and people just came and they would spend like 6 hours in there.
Yeah.
Like a playground almost.
And I think it's interesting because, again, both of these things have that concept of the new originally. Like, something about the new is important to get somebody to the door or to notice it. Like, you talked about, like, the wine carboy, like, showing up on the beach.
Yeah.
But if that wine carboy, if you open it up and it's a scroll that says something completely useless, you're going to be like, oh, man, well, time to look at some of these smaller bottles.
Yeah, it's like you have to contrast in a different way.
Yeah.
Because if you saw, by the 10th carboy, you'd start to be like, okay, I'm going to skip the next one.
Or if you opened up, 100 of the bottles on the beach and every single one was empty, you probably wouldn't look at 100 at first. Like at some point you need
Probably
to have
after 4, you wouldn't look at a fifth.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's honestly 2, maybe 3. Like if
Yeah.
you see 2, it's like, oh well. But regardless, it's this idea of like, while new is a really important element, it gets us there. There needs to be something below new.
Yeah. And oftentimes artists engage this kind of mysterious ambiguity and vagueness because it keeps us coming back, because it's not handing us a fact. It's not saying lead boils at 350 degrees. Instead it's maybe saying something like weird, like we're all connected.
Yep.
In what way?
Yeah.
It's like those poetic statements have a vagary in them that I think gets us coming back. And you think about like the stories, like even it's really easy to break down Harry Potter into like a retelling of the Christian myth of Christ, but it's not just that. Like there's so much more friendship in Harry Potter than there is in the Gospels. And there's all kinds of elements of like, where do you fit into the story? What do you do about that weird little Neville Longbottom kid who maybe he was going to be the chosen one? And, it's like you get all of these other little mysteries that we like to dwell on. We like to think about. We like to, what house would I be in?
Yeah.
And it's like, because you're getting at, well, Gryffindor isn't like an easy thing. It kind of is like brave and brash, but then again, Ron and Hermione were there as well.
Yeah.
So it's like everything is this kind of defined but kind of mysterious, and it allows us to enter in and explore in some way, which I think that's what the Sistine Chapel does, and that's what Anne Hamilton did with the Event of a Thread. And I think, those are really large scale. It's much easier to do it at large scale.
Yeah.
That's why we always tell students to go big.
Yeah.
But it can be done at smaller scale as well. Poetry in particular, I think, is really good at doing this. Of like, I saw a video about Orwell's density and this way in which, like, because words can have more than one meaning, in poetry in particular, but in fiction, a single sentence can hold so much. And it's hard to do that with a piece of visual art. But occasionally you could find little things like my favorite Rembrandt portrait of all time is this tiny one. It's like this big. And it's this him in his studio. And there's something about the eyes. It's always the eyes with Rembrandt, but there's something about that little image. Like you just see him tiny, little guy, little Rembrandt, just dwarfed in that space. And it's already tiny inside. It's at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I can just feel it from across the room, like all these paintings around, and then you just see this little square. And there's something about that contrast and that mystery that I go in there, and then it's like, what is he, he's the best painter ever. What is he doing making this tiny little thing?
Is that the one where, is he looking at an empty canvas, or he's looking at, like,
you can't see the canvas.
Yeah,
you can't see the canvas.
He's just kind of like leaning against like some sort of back wall in his studio, or like a desk or something. Yeah.
And like when did, it just leaves so many questions. I think of Rembrandt like working on these beautiful, dense, dark canvases. And then like, when did he do this little guy? There's something, and why did he do it?
Yeah.
There's like a mystery there that in my opinion keeps bringing me back to it. The paintings that are very like, I get it, the Ad Reinhardts.
Yeah.
This is what Greenberg said.
Yep.
Like, good job. I don't need to see you again. Oh, man.
Yeah.
The third one that I was thinking about is the Bizarre. And I had you load up William Blake.
Yeah.
Bizarre, I don't know if maybe these aren't good distinctions. Maybe they're all the same. That's why I'd love to hear your thoughts after on them. Like, because I think that was a really good point there about the mysterious still needs some sort of like, or the contrast in particular, probably still needs something new. I do think there's a subtle distinction there of contrast can be using something old to make it new.
Yeah.
But so Blake is a really funny one because his writing and his, these are all prints. Like he would do these as, I don't think they were etchings. I forget what style he was using. But anyways, he's making these, and he self-published all this stuff because his stuff was so weird no one else wanted to publish it. And it's weird.
Yeah.
Some of it's close to heretical, maybe. This one that we're looking at is London, where he's like looking at the underbelly, disgusting part of London, and he's talking about like the way in which the church and the aristocracy are kind of abandoning the poor, specifically the poor children, and that image up there of like an old man being led by a little child towards some sort of door, perhaps. And then in the poem, you realize that the child is oftentimes the victim of the church and the rich. And then it really it's bizarre.
Yeah.
It really
it's
makes
like
you
unsettling almost. You're like, what's actually happening in that picture? I don't trust that anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, which to me, so it's like, it's different. It is contrasting, but it's a little bit different. And it's not quite, I do think it is mysterious, but it's more, I don't recognize what this is. And I think that's why his work was initially rejected. That's why I'd call it the bizarre, where it's like, I can't quite place what this is. Is it activism? Is it poetry? Is it epic poetry? He does all kinds of things with his artwork in strange ways. Did we lose our...
That computer's dead. Yeah.
Your computer's dead.
I think we have everything we need from it, so I think we're good.
Yeah. So Blake, I think, is a great example of that happening in the past, and how now it's still kind of bizarre, but we've seen a lot of that. And even yesterday in one of the critiques, someone mentioned Blake as cliche today.
Yeah.
Wish that would be true. Like if someone were to look at William Blake's drawings and paintings and his books and poetry and whatnot and started making that work today, it would feel as if they were really out of touch with, especially like graphic novels.
Yeah.
The way in which text and imagery works today in visual art is built on the back of Blake, but that's no longer new and bizarre to us. Blake, if you put it in the context of illuminated manuscripts, Blake is weird. He's taking images of God, he's making him into an old man being led by a child. There's like all kinds of strange, bizarre things that we're not used to seeing. And that makes me like the example I thought of a new one was Bo Burnham's Inside. Talk about bizarre.
Yeah. It's like as strange as it gets, where every single clip is genuinely something where it's like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this before.
Yeah.
Like I've seen this, reminds me of some things, but this has a level of like both absurdity and unsettlingness to it that I can't quite get my head around.
Yeah, even little things. So, like, for folks who don't know, how would you describe Bo Burnham's Inside to someone who's never seen it?
So the context is really pretty important because the entire thing was made during COVID with just like essentially him, a camera, and a keyboard in this like weird little shed that he was like partially living in at the time. Like it's a weird story.
And he's a comedian.
He's a comedian, and there are parts of this that are really funny, and most of it is just really, really like hard to stomach, like depressing and brutal and like really, I'd almost say like apathetic and nihilistic at times.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of content in it that's not funny.
Right. And he takes so many of the trappings of like pop songs, comedy stand-up routines, social media posts. Like he has a song about FaceTiming with his mom.
Yeah.
You know, he has all of these different things, and then they're all done in a bizarre context. And he even points out the stuff. Like, it's such a weird room that he's in. And then there's one time where he jokes, is that a really small door, or am I just a really big man?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, the door is weird. What's wrong with that? Then he goes outside, and it's like, he's still inside.
Yep.
It's like he built a shed inside his apartment that he then made it look like an interior of an apartment. It's like everything about it is like, what on earth is happening?
Yeah, or he goes outside and there's like, you can't tell if he's like on a stage. There's like a spotlight. You're like, what? Why is that in your backyard? Why did you leave your shed and now you're like on stage somewhere?
I don't think it's out. I think that whole thing is inside his apartment.
Really?
I think so. But this gets at its bizarreness. Like, this is my thought on at least. So there's 4 strategies: is pursue the new, which personally I think that's tiring. I just don't think it's feasible for most of us. But I think some strategies, maybe it's like one Uber strategy of contrast, but then make something mysterious or make something weird.
Yeah.
Like that's at least some route into how do you get people's attention, and how do you get them to even start reading the message? Hopefully what you're saying is newsworthy. But you'll never know with it. Like, I think the Fight Club example with my father is a great example of how he says in here, I think it's on page 139, let me check it. His quote, no, that's not the one I wanted to read, 131. On 131 he says, but in judging the significance of a piece of news, everything depends on the situation of the hearer. There's only so much we can do about the situation of the hearer.
Yeah.
Or the receiver, or the viewer of the visual art. But I do think there's a lot we can do to help them out. Make it noticeable. Make it like, so that you're not just hitting them with a 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
Thanks. You know, say something that's maybe has some accessibility to ambiguity and mystery. Or maybe say something really strange. You know, sing about calling your mom on FaceTime while being stuck alone in a room, like, makes you wonder about, should I call my mom on FaceTime?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because all 3 of the things we talked about have some element of the new to them. Where bizarreness or contrast or mystery, all those things require something kind of unknown and unrecognizable, like something that we wouldn't come across in our daily lives.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what they're getting at is that there's something more than new happening here. Like, mystery isn't new. Mystery is saying, there's something that I don't understand. And while it might originally stick out to me because it isn't the same as everything else around me, the reason I'm going to keep on working at it is because I don't understand it right away. Or contrast would be saying, even though this is different than everything else, I'm interested in it because it's so different from everything else, or there's such a strict line back and forth.
Yeah.
So and I don't think that this conversation is meant to condemn people making new things in any way.
No, I want to see new art.
Yeah, making new art is fantastic and important. I think the question is just if new is the only thing you're offering,
yeah,
then what are you doing? Like, what are you saying other than I made something new?
And this gets at my critique of most what is called new media art, which frequently today what that means is projection mapping that allows for some sort of interaction with the viewer.
Yeah.
It's rarely that interesting. It is just new. No one's ever done this before. Cool. Like, how is that relevant? What does that mean to me? Like, now you can project something in space and I can move my body and it can change what is projected in space. That's not that relevant to me. But artists are we focus so much on the new that we don't understand, but there's something more. Most human beings, the problem of interactive projection has not been anywhere on their map of this is an important newsworthy event. And so when they interact with it, they're like, that's cool, and they like play with the koi in the pond on the projection below them for a few minutes, and then they move on.
It is interesting because it gets us to this place of the creation of a new type of media is really important. Like, what I think about right away is photography, right? Where photography was created fairly recently, and there was a period of time where people weren't quite sure if it was art, probably because people were looking at it just going, well, it's new, but what is it really doing?
Mm-hmm.
And gradually people have taken it to a place where they're introducing these concepts of contrast and mystery and bizarreness and showing people things from a new perspective, or being able to say, like, I've taken a photograph, but what's important isn't the fact that this was taken on a camera. What's important is that you're looking at something that there's something in this image that might actually matter, that might actually change to you. Mm-hmm. And that was the point when photography stopped becoming about documentation or the scientific process, and started being considered an art form.
Right.
So with projection mapping, for instance, I don't know if it's a viable technology, but at some point maybe it's going to be easy enough to work with that people who understand it can create, like, we'll say like a James Turrell like experience with projection mapping, where I could go into a room that was projection mapped and really understand a new idea for the first time.
Yeah. That's where I think the sphere in Vegas is getting at that, of like, we all know that VR exists, but it just doesn't seem relevant. Like, you can't do anything.
Yeah.
You're like alone, having your own experience. You're not like so much of our visual experience, especially of really powerful, amazing visuals and things, is sharing it with people. That's why we go on hikes together so frequently. There's very few people who hike, to the top of Yosemite and stand there alone looking. They hike with a friend.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, look at that. And then they see the other person looking at that. They're both enjoying it together. And the sphere gives you the VR experience, but it's with all those people.
Yeah.
You're able to go and be like, look, this thing we know is a dome changed itself so it looks like we're in a cube. Like, and you get to point at it, and they get to see, when you're in VR, it's like everyone's laughing at you because you're the blind person.
Yep.
It's like, it's like it hasn't gotten at the human experience. Like, we're still human beings, which is like one of the things, again, to return to kind of this thought of the audience. So much of modern and then postmodern art forgot that our audience is still humans.
Yeah.
And not scientists just like, yes, this is new. This has not been done before. Art.
I think VR is the perfect example of this, because I have yet to see a VR video where what the person experiencing in VR is like funnier or more interesting than watching the person try to navigate like a physical space with one of those headsets on. Like, it's like every time we're like, I don't care what's happening on the screen, but the fact that in VR you thought you fell off of a bridge and in real life you fell down, that's amazing. That's great.
Yep.
Like, that's such a weird thing that happens.
Seeing the way, we're so not ready for VR.
Yeah.
When you see people respond like they're, everything that their brain is telling them is something just jumped and scared me, and I need to move quickly. And it's like, you've got all these wires, you've got these things in your space, and you're jumping away from an invisible thing, and you smash through a real glass table.
Yeah.
Like, we're not ready.
Yeah, or like, I mean, it's like it's my like dark sense of humor coming up, but like some VR system recently like announced like, we've like heard your complaints, we've introduced a new system, and the system is a camera on the VR headset that can recognize when a child is walking in front of you, and the child shows up in the VR landscape, so you know, I can't go over there because there's a kid that I'm gonna kick.
Yeah,
or like,
wow, so many kids have been hit or kicked.
Yeah, like it's like hilarious to me. That's like, we've heard your complaints. Your children are safe. here's your child detection camera.
That is amazing.
It is, and it's like that's more new than VR to me.
Yeah.
That people need this special kid camera on their head, but
Yeah. Well, and there's something, because again, that's because it's bizarre.
Yeah, it is.
It's like, what a weird piece of news.
Yeah,
it's pretty bizarre that we have a series of adults who have children, who their children are getting beat up by people with VR headsets on.
Yeah,
we need to solve that problem.
We need to solve that problem. Yep.
That's news to me.
That's news.
Well, excellent. We'll talk some more. I think we'll talk more about Percy, but I want to bring in some postmodern thinkers here as well. I think some Benjamin.
Awesome.
Excellent. I don't remember how we end these things.
I look forward to talking to you next week.
Sounds good.